The first thing I felt was silk against my skin, expensive, cool, unfamiliar. My eyes cracked open to champagne-colored sunlight filtering through floor-to-ceiling windows, and that's when the panic hit. This wasn't my room. This wasn't my bed. And the man standing by the window, his back to me, wasn't someone I knew. His shoulders were broad beneath a black dress shirt, his posture radiating the kind of dangerous calm that makes your instincts scream run. But I couldn't move. Because when he turned around, his face was devastatingly beautiful and absolutely terrifying. Dark eyes that could cut through steel, a jawline sharp enough to draw blood, and a scar that traced from his temple to his cheekbone like a signature of violence. He looked at me the way a predator studies prey, and then he said 4 words that changed everything: "You chose my car." My name is Seoul Kong, and 24 hours ago, I was just another overworked translator trying to survive in Seoul. Now I'm waking up in the bed of Kael Rhys Jin, the man whose name makes grown men whisper and whose reputation is written in blood across the city's underworld. The question isn't how I got here. The question is whether I'll leave alive. But let me take you back to where this nightmare began, because the truth is always darker than you think, and my story. It started with a single choice, a bottle of soju, and a black Mercedes that should have been just another car on a rain-soaked street. Where are you watching this from? Drop your location in the comments right now, because you're going to want to be part of this community when you see how this unfolds. And hit that subscribe button immediately, because what happens next will make your heart stop, and you won't want to miss a single second. 3 days before I woke up in that bed, my life was a different kind of hell. The kind where you work 16-hour days translating corporate documents, where your tiny apartment smells like instant ramen and loneliness, where your mother calls from Busan every Sunday to remind you that you're 28 and unmarried, and what is she supposed to tell the neighbors? That kind of hell. Manageable. Predictable. Safe. I specialized in Korean to English contracts for import-export companies, which sounds boring until you realize that half of Seoul's business dealings happen in the shadows, where legitimate commerce bleeds into something else entirely. I'd learned not to ask questions about why a shipping manifest listed industrial equipment when the specifications clearly described something else. I'd learned to keep my head down, do the work, take the money, and forget everything I'd seen by morning. That Thursday started like any other. I was in my office, a glorified closet in a building near Gangnam Station, when my phone buzzed with a message from my colleague Yuna. "Emergency drinks tonight. My boyfriend just proposed and I said no. I need you." Yuna was the only person in Seoul I'd call a friend, mainly because she was as much of a disaster as I was. Where I was anxious and overthinking, she was impulsive and fearless, which is probably why she dated 3 different men that month alone. I texted back that I'd meet her at 9. By the time I finished my last translation job, a particularly suspicious contract about agricultural supplies going to an address I recognized from news reports about gang activity, it was already 8:30. I barely had time to change from my work clothes into jeans and a black sweater before rushing to the bar in Itaewon, where Yuna was probably already 3 drinks deep. The place was called Midnight Seoul, one of those trendy spots where the lighting is perpetually dim and the music is just loud enough to make conversation feel intimate. Yuna was at the bar, her designer handbag taking up the stool next to her, a cocktail with a ridiculous amount of fruit in it clutched in her hand. "You look terrible," she said by way of greeting. "You said your boyfriend proposed." "Ex-boyfriend now. He wanted me to move to Daegu." "Daegu, Seoul. Can you imagine me in Daegu?" I couldn't, actually. Yuna belonged in Seoul the way fish belong in water, all that restless energy and constant motion. We ordered drinks, she got something with champagne, I got soju because I was still basically a college student at heart, and she launched into the story of the proposal, which had apparently happened at a family dinner with his parents present, which explained why she'd panicked and said no. "He's a good guy," she said, already slurring slightly. "He's just not my guy, you know?" I didn't know, actually. I hadn't had a relationship that lasted longer than 3 months since university. Work consumed everything, and the men I met were either clients I couldn't date or colleagues who only saw me as the quiet translator girl who never joined the office dinners. We drank more. Yuna told me about her mother's reaction to the rejection, which involved crying and predictions of eternal loneliness. I told her about the suspicious contract I'd translated, and she laughed and said I was too paranoid, that rich people just did weird things with their money. "Maybe you should loosen up," she said, ordering us another round. "Lev a little. Make bad decisions." "I make bad decisions every day," I said. "I just make them in my head." "That doesn't count." The bar filled up as the night wore on, the crowd a mix of expats and wealthy Koreans, everyone beautiful in that Seoul way where you couldn't tell if it was genetics or good plastic surgery or just expensive skincare. Yuna kept drinking, kept talking, and I kept up with her because the alternative was going home to my empty apartment and lying awake worrying about money and my mother and the future that felt like it was shrinking every day. Somewhere around midnight, Yuna left with a man she'd been flirting with for the last hour, someone with a nice smile and a Rolex I could spot from across the room. She kissed my cheek, told me to get home safe, and disappeared into the Seoul night, leaving me alone with a bar tab I couldn't quite afford and the realization that I was far drunker than I'd intended to be. I paid with my credit card, already mentally calculating how long it would take to pay it off, and stumbled out into the rain. Seoul in the rain always felt different, like the city was washing away its sins, though they always came back by morning. I stood on the corner trying to get my phone to work, my fingers clumsy, the screen blurring in and out of focus. The taxi apps weren't loading. My phone was dying. The rain was coming down harder now, soaking through my sweater, and the street was mostly empty except for a few other drunk people stumbling towards subway stations or waiting under awnings. That's when I saw the car. A black Mercedes Maybach S-Class, idling at the curb with its engine purring like a satisfied cat. The windows were tinted so dark I couldn't see inside, and there was something about it that screamed money and danger in equal measure. The kind of car that people in my line of work knew meant power, the kind you didn't question. But I was drunk, and cold, and desperate, and when the back door opened slightly as if in invitation, I made the worst decision of my life. I got in. The interior was exactly what you'd expect. Leather seats that probably cost more than my yearly rent, ambient lighting in that soft blue that luxury cars always have, and a privacy screen between the back and the driver. But what I didn't expect was the man sitting in the far corner, his face half in shadow. Even drunk, I knew I'd made a mistake. Everything about him screamed danger. The way he sat, perfectly still, perfectly controlled. The way his eyes fixed on me with an intensity that made my skin prickle. The way the air itself seemed to change when he breathed. "Wrong car," he said. His voice was deep, accented with that particular soul polish that came from expensive schools and inherited power. "I need a ride," I heard myself saying. The words felt distant, like someone else was speaking through me. "Please." He didn't move. Just studied me with those dark eyes that revealed nothing and promised everything, none of it good. The silence stretched out, broken only by the rain hammering against the roof and my own heartbeat, which was suddenly very loud in my ears. "Where?" he finally asked. I gave him my address in Mapogu, and he said something to the driver in Korean too quick and quiet for me to catch in my drunken state. The car started moving, and that should have been my first clue that something was very wrong, because men like him didn't just give drunk women rides home out of the goodness of their hearts. But I was already falling asleep, the motion of the car and the warmth of the leather and the sheer exhaustion of my life pulling me under. The last thing I remember before everything went dark was his face, watching me with an expression I couldn't read, and the faint scent of something expensive and dangerous, like smoke and cedar and things that burn. I woke up to silk sheets and sunlight, and that's where we came in, isn't it? Me, confused and terrified, and him, standing by the window like some kind of dark angel who'd decided to take human form just to make my life more complicated. You chose my car, Kael Rhys Jin repeated, and there was something in his voice that made it sound like I'd done something far more significant than just stumble into the wrong vehicle. Like I'd crossed some invisible line that couldn't be uncrossed. I sat up slowly, clutching the sheets to my chest, and that's when I realized I was still fully dressed except for my shoes, which were neatly placed by the bed. That should have been reassuring, but somehow it made everything worse, because it meant he'd carried me, undressed me partially, put me in his bed, and then what? Watched me sleep? Left me there? The possibilities were all terrifying in different ways. Where am I? My voice came out hoarse, broken. My penthouse. Hanam-dong. He said it casually, like it was no big deal, but Hanam-dong was where Seoul's elite lived, where apartments cost millions and neighbors included celebrities and conglomerate heirs and apparently, according to the rumors I'd heard in translation circles, very dangerous men. Why am I here? He turned fully to face me, and in the daylight he was even more striking than he'd been in the dark car. Beautiful in a way that was almost offensive, like genetics and money had conspired to create something designed to make people stop thinking rationally. The scar only added to it, made him look like he'd survived things that would have killed softer men. You got into my car uninvited. You passed out. I couldn't exactly leave you on the street. He moved closer, and I instinctively pressed back against the headboard. Though perhaps I should have. I'll leave, I said quickly. I'm sorry, I was drunk, I thought. You thought you'd get into a stranger's car in the middle of the night in Itaewon. His tone was cutting now, sharp enough to draw blood. Do you have any idea how stupid that was? Yes, I whispered. I know. I'm sorry. He studied me for a long moment, and I couldn't read his expression at all. It was like looking at a wall, perfectly smooth, revealing nothing. Then he did something unexpected, he smiled, and it was worse than his anger, because there was no warmth in it at all. You're lucky it was me, he said softly. Anyone else, and you might not have woken up at all. The words hung in the air between us, heavy with implications I didn't want to examine. I needed to get out of here, needed to get back to my safe, boring, predictable life, needed to forget this ever happened. But then he said, I know who you are, Solin Kong. My blood turned to ice. What? You're a translator. You work with Daehan Import-Export, among others. You translated a contract 3 months ago for a shipping company I have interests in. He said it all matter-of-factly, like we were discussing the weather. You're very good at your job. Very discreet. Which makes me wonder what you were doing getting drunk in Itaewon and stumbling into cars that don't belong to you. I couldn't breathe. He knew who I was. He knew where I worked. Which meant he knew exactly what kind of documents I translated. Which meant he was exactly the kind of man I'd spent my career trying to avoid noticing too much. I want to go home, I said, hating how small my voice sounded. Of course. He gestured toward a door. Bathrooms through there. Your shoes are by the bed. My driver will take you wherever you need to go. It should have been that simple. A mistake, an uncomfortable morning, a ride home, and then never thinking about it again. But as I stood on shaking legs and moved toward the bathroom, he spoke again. One more thing, Solene. I froze. The contract you translated yesterday. The agricultural supplies going to Seoul. I need you to forget you ever saw it. My heart hammered against my ribs. I always forget the contracts. Good. That dangerous smile again. Because the people involved in that particular deal don't appreciate curiosity. And I'd hate for something to happen to someone as talented as you. It was a threat disguised as concern, and we both knew it. I nodded, grabbed my shoes, and practically ran for the door. The driver was waiting outside the penthouse, silent and professional, and the ride back to my apartment passed in a blur of panic and confusion and the growing realization that my life had just become very, very complicated. But here's what I didn't know yet, what I couldn't have known as I stumbled into my apartment and locked the door and seriously considered never leaving again. Kael Rhys Jin hadn't let me go out of kindness. He'd let me go because he'd already decided I was useful. And in his world, useful meant owned. The proof came 2 days later. I was at my desk, trying to focus on a mundane contract about automotive parts, when my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. Just an address in Gangnam and a time, 8 p.m. tonight. I ignored it. Deleted it. Told myself it was spam or a wrong number or anything other than what I knew it actually was. 10 minutes later, another message, it's not a request, Solene. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely type. Who is this? The response came immediately, you know who this is. Be there. Bring your laptop. I should have refused. Should have blocked the number, maybe even gone to the police, though what would I tell them? That I'd gotten drunk and climbed into a crime boss's car and now he wanted to meet me? They'd laugh me out of the station. But there was something in those messages that made it clear refusal wasn't really an option. Not if I wanted to keep my kneecaps intact, or my career, or possibly my life. So at 7:30 that evening, I found myself standing outside a luxury office building in Gangnam, my laptop bag clutched to my chest like a shield, wondering how my life had spiraled so far out of control in just 3 days. The lobby was all marble and glass, the kind of place where even the air felt expensive. A woman in a perfect black suit was waiting by the elevators, and she escorted me up to the 15th floor without a word, her heels clicking against the floor in a rhythm that sounded like a countdown. The elevator doors opened directly into an office that looked more like a luxury apartment, dark wood, leather furniture, Seoul's skyline glittering through the windows. And there, behind a desk that probably cost more than my car, was Kael Rhys Jin. He looked different here. More controlled. More powerful. This was his domain, and I was the intruder. Sit, he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. I sat. I have a job for you. I'm not interested. That cold smile. I don't recall giving you a choice. He slid a folder across the desk. Inside were contracts, documents, shipping manifests, all in English, all coded with the same kind of careful language I'd learned to recognize as something illegal dressed up as something legitimate. I need these translated into Korean by tomorrow morning, he said. And I need them translated carefully, with attention to detail, making sure nothing can be traced back to the original terms. You want me to help you launder illegal contracts? I want you to do your job. He leaned back in his chair, studying me. The same job you've been doing for 3 years, except this time you'll be doing it for me directly instead of through a dozen shell companies. And if I refuse? Then I'll make sure everyone knows about the other contracts you've translated. The ones for the Bukchang Corporation. The ones for the 7 Stars Group. The ones that would put you in prison for facilitating organized crime. My stomach dropped. I didn't know. Doesn't matter. You translated them. Your signature is on the documents. And I have copies of all of them. It was checkmate, and we both knew it. He'd done his research, found my weakness, and now I was trapped. The worst part was how calm he looked, like this was just business, like destroying my life was just another Tuesday for him. Why me? I asked, hating the defeat in my voice. You could hire anyone. Because you're good. Because you're discreet. And because you already know too much to be trustworthy to anyone else. He stood, moved around the desk, leaned against it so he was looking down at me. Work for me, Solene, and I'll make sure you're protected. Refuse, and I'll make sure you're destroyed. It's really very simple. Here's something they don't tell you about powerful men. They don't need to raise their voices to be terrifying. Kael Rhys Jin spoke in that same calm, controlled tone the whole time, and somehow that made it worse, because it meant this wasn't anger or impulse. It was calculated. It was business. I took the folder. Good, he said. My driver will pick you up tomorrow morning at 9. Bring the translations. I left that office feeling like I'd just sold my soul, and maybe I had. But what choice did I have? In Seoul, in the world I'd been working in for 3 years without fully understanding it, men like Kael Rhys Jin didn't give you choices. They gave you illusions of choices while pulling the strings that controlled your life. That night, I worked until 4 in the morning, translating those contracts with the kind of careful attention that comes from fear. Every word had to be perfect. Every phrase had to maintain the careful balance between legal and illegal, obvious and hidden. It was the best work I'd ever done, and I hated every second of it. But here's what I didn't realize until much later, until everything had already gone too far to stop. That night wasn't the beginning of my nightmare. It was the beginning of something else entirely, something I couldn't have predicted, something that would change everything I thought I knew about myself, about power, about survival, and about what happens when you stop being afraid and start being dangerous yourself. The black Mercedes picked me up at exactly 9 a.m., and this time I knew better than to hesitate before getting in. The driver, a man whose face looked like it had been carved from granite, took the laptop bag without a word, and we drove through Seoul's morning chaos in silence. We didn't go to the office. Instead, we pulled up to a traditional Korean restaurant in Samcheongdong, the kind of place that doesn't have signs because it doesn't need them, where reservations are made months in advance and politicians meet with business partners to discuss things that never make it into official records. Kael was waiting in a private room, seated on the floor at a low table, wearing a black suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. He looked like he belonged in a magazine spread about modern Korean masculinity, all sharp lines and dangerous elegance. Sit, he said, and I did, placing the laptop carefully on the table between us. He opened it, scanned the translations with a speed that told me he was fluent in both languages, that the whole thing had been a test as much as it was a job. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, he closed the laptop and nodded. Good. Better than I expected. He poured tea into 2 cups, pushed one toward me. You're wasted doing corporate work. I like corporate work. It's safe. Safe is boring. Boring keeps you alive. He smiled at that, a real smile this time, and it transformed his face completely. For just a second, I could see what he might have been like before whatever had happened to put that scar on his face, before he'd become whatever he was now. Tell me something, Solene. How did a woman with your skills end up translating documents in a closet office for barely enough money to survive? I could ask you the same question. How does a man who looks like he belongs in a luxury office end up running whatever it is you run? The smile disappeared. Careful. You asked. I did. He studied me for a moment. My father built an empire. I inherited it. And I'm making sure it survives in a world that's changing faster than people like him ever imagined. There was something in his voice when he mentioned his father, something that sounded almost like regret. But it was gone so quickly I might have imagined it. And you, he prompted. Why translation? I didn't want to answer, didn't want to give him anything personal, but there was something about the way he asked that made it feel less like interrogation and more like genuine curiosity. I was good at languages, I said finally. And my family needed money. Translation paid well enough, and I thought if I kept my head down, did good work, I could build a stable life. Stable. There's that word again. What's wrong with wanting stability? Nothing. Until stability becomes a prison. He was right, and I hated that he was right. My safe, boring life had been a kind of prison, one I'd built for myself out of fear and obligation and the belief that wanting more was dangerous. But here I was anyway, sitting across from a man who represented every kind of danger I'd spent years avoiding, and somehow I wasn't running. Maybe because there was nowhere to run to. Maybe because running felt pointless now that he'd seen me, really seen me, in a way no one had in years. I need you to do more work for me, he said, switching back to business. Regular translations. Contracts, documents, communications. I'll pay you 3 times what you're making now. And if I say no? You won't. He was right about that too. Not just because of the threat hanging over me, but because some part of me, the part that had gotten into his car drunk and desperate, wanted to see where this would lead. Wanted to step out of the prison of stability and into whatever chaos he represented. One condition, I said, surprising myself. I want to know what I'm translating. I want to understand what I'm helping you do. His eyes narrowed. That's dangerous knowledge. Then I'm already in danger. At least let me know why. He considered this for a long moment, and I could see him calculating risks, weighing options. Finally, he nodded. Fair enough. But once you know, you can't unknow. You understand that? I nodded. I run what people call the Baekdu organization. We handle imports and exports, yes, but we also handle other things. Information. Protection. Leverage. We operate in the spaces between legal and illegal, and we do it well enough that the police look the other way because we keep the real violence off the streets. You're a crime boss. I'm a businessman who understands that laws are often obstacles to actual justice and efficiency. He said it without shame, like he was describing the weather. And before you judge me too harshly, remember that every contract you've translated for the last 3 years has been for organizations just like mine. The only difference is now you know it. He was right. I'd been naive or willfully blind or both, translating documents that seemed legitimate on the surface while ignoring all the signs that something else was happening beneath. At least now I couldn't pretend anymore. What happens if I want out? I asked. Later, I mean. When whatever this is ends. If you're valuable enough, smart enough, and lucky enough, then maybe you walk away. But most people in my world don't retire, Solene. They either rise or they fall, and the fall is usually permanent. It should have terrified me. Instead, I felt something else, a strange kind of clarity, like everything that had been foggy about my life suddenly came into focus. Maybe I'd been waiting for something like this, some catalyst to force me out of the safe, boring prison I'd built. Maybe that's why I'd gotten into his car in the first place. When do I start? I asked. You already have. Over the following weeks, I fell into a new routine. During the day, I maintained my regular translation work, keeping up appearances. At night, I worked for Kael, translating increasingly complex documents that revealed the true scope of his organization. Shipping routes for goods that were definitely not legal. Communications with partners in China, Japan, Russia. Financial documents that showed money moving through so many shell companies I lost count. But he kept his word about transparency. For every document I translated, he explained the context. Why this shipment mattered. Who these partners were. What the end game was. And slowly, I began to understand that the Baekdu organization wasn't just a criminal enterprise, it was a sophisticated operation that filled gaps in the legal economy, that provided services people needed but couldn't get legitimately. Was it still crime? Yes. Was it as simple as good versus evil? Not even close. I also began to understand Kael himself. He was brilliant, ruthless when necessary, but also surprisingly principled in his way. He had lines he wouldn't cross: no human trafficking, no drugs that would end up in schools, no violence against civilians unless absolutely necessary. His enemies were other organizations like his own, and even then he preferred strategic maneuvering over bloodshed. Violence is expensive, he told me once. It attracts attention, creates vendettas, destabilizes everything. Much better to make people believe you're willing to be violent than to actually be violent. We met regularly now, sometimes at his office, sometimes at restaurants, once at his penthouse where I'd first woken up. Each meeting felt like peeling back another layer of a very complex person who was nothing like what I'd expected. He asked about my life too. My family in Busan. My failed relationships. My dreams of maybe writing a book someday, though I never told anyone that because it seemed ridiculous for a translator to have literary ambitions. Why is it ridiculous? He asked. You work with language every day. You understand how words build meaning. Why shouldn't you create something of your own? Because dreams like that are for people who don't have to worry about rent. Or for people brave enough to take risks. But what do you think? Was I being brave or was I being reckless? When someone dangerous offers you a way out of your boring life, is taking that offer courage or just another kind of cowardice? Leave your thoughts in the comments because I still don't know the answer. Then, 6 weeks after that first morning in his bed, everything changed. I was at my apartment, my real apartment, the cramped one in Mapogu that I still paid rent on even though I was spending most nights working late at offices or restaurants, when someone knocked on my door. Not the polite knock of a delivery person or neighbor. The kind of knock that means something is wrong. I looked through the peephole and saw two men in dark suits, their faces expressionless, their body language screaming authority. Miss Kong? We're with the National Intelligence Service. We need to ask you some questions about your work. My blood turned to ice. The NIS. Not the police. Not some low-level investigation. The actual intelligence service, which meant they weren't interested in small crimes. They were interested in Kael. And I was the weak link. I let them in because refusing would have made things worse. They were polite about it, professional, but there was steel underneath the courtesy. The shorter one introduced himself as Agent Yoon, the taller as Agent Beck. They sat on my worn couch like they belonged there, like they'd been waiting for this moment. Miss Kong, we understand you do translation work for various import-export companies, Agent Yoon began. Is that correct? Yes. And one of those companies is Daehan Import-Export, correct? Yes. Are you aware that Daehan is a front for the Baekdu organization? My heart was hammering, but I kept my face neutral. I translate documents. I'm not an investigator. Agent Beck smiled, and it wasn't friendly. Come now, Miss Kong. You're intelligent. You must have noticed certain irregularities in the contracts you've handled. I noticed that some companies use legal language to obscure their actual activities. But that's not uncommon in international business. But you specifically translate for Kael Rhys Jin now, don't you? Agent Yoon pulled out photos from his briefcase. Me entering the Gangnam office. Me at the restaurant in Samcheongdong. Me getting into the black Mercedes. Regular meetings. Late nights. One might think you're more than just a translator. I forced myself to stay calm. Mr. Jin hired me for consulting work. Translation, cultural mediation, business communications. All perfectly legal. Consulting work that you do in person, after hours, meeting in private rooms of restaurants known for facilitating sensitive discussions? Agent Beck's tone was cutting now. Miss Kong, we've been investigating the Baekdu organization for 2 years. We know what they do. We know what Mr. Jin is. And we know that you've been helping him. Then arrest me. The words came out before I could stop them, but once they were out there, I realized I meant them. If they had actual evidence, they would have led with that. The photos proved meetings, nothing more. Agent Yoon's expression shifted, surprise flickering across his face. We don't want to arrest you, Miss Kong. We want your help. And there it was. The real reason for the visit. We need someone inside the Baekdu organization, Agent Beck said. Someone who has Jin's trust, who can access his documents, who can provide us with evidence we can actually use in court. You're perfectly positioned. You want me to spy on him. We want you to do the right thing. Kael Rhys Jin is responsible for millions of won in illegal trade, money laundering, possibly even connections to North Korean smuggling operations. He's dangerous, Miss Kong, and the longer he operates freely, the more harm he causes. They painted him as a monster, but the man they described didn't match the person I'd come to know. Yes, Kael operated outside the law, but the NIS made it sound like he was some kind of kingpin bringing down society when the reality was far more nuanced. And if I refuse? I asked. Then we'll have to assume you're complicit in his crimes. Which means prosecution. Prison time. Your career destroyed. Your family in Busan learning that their daughter helped facilitate organized crime. The threat was clear. Cooperate or be destroyed. The same choice Kael had given me months ago, except coming from the opposite direction. I need time to think. You have 24 hours, Agent Yoon said, standing. After that, we move forward with or without your cooperation. And Miss Kong? Choose carefully. Men like Jin don't let people go. Whatever relationship you think you have with him, remember that to him, you're a tool. Nothing more. They left, and I sat in my apartment staring at the walls, trying trying to process what had just happened. I was caught between two forces, the NIS and the Baekdu organization, and either choice meant betraying someone, destroying something. The smart play would have been to cooperate with the NIS. They had the law on their side, and if Kael really was everything they said, then helping bring him down would be the right thing to do. But nothing about this situation was simple. I'd seen Kael's operation from the inside. I'd translated documents that showed an organization that, yes, broke laws, but also filled needs that the legitimate economy ignored. Protection for small businesses that couldn't afford legal security. Financial services for immigrants who banks refused to help. Even charity work, though he'd kill me for calling it that, funding for schools in poor neighborhoods, medical care for people who fell through the cracks of the healthcare system. Was it legal? No. Was it entirely selfless? Definitely not. But was it the pure evil the NIS painted it as? I wasn't sure anymore. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I went through everything I'd translated, every conversation I'd had with Kael, trying to find clarity that wouldn't come. By morning, I'd made my decision. I called the number Agent Yoon had given me and told them I'd cooperate. But I was lying. What I actually did was go directly to Kael. His office was busier than usual, people moving through with the kind of controlled urgency that meant something big was happening. I walked past them all, straight to his door, and knocked once before entering. He looked up from his desk, surprise flickering across his face. "Soline? We don't have a meeting scheduled?" "The NIS came to my apartment last night," I said, closing the door behind me. "They want me to inform on you. They gave me 24 hours to decide." The office went completely silent. Kael's expression didn't change, but something shifted in the air, a sudden tension that made the temperature drop. "And what did you tell them?" His voice was carefully controlled, but I could hear the danger underneath. "I told them I'd cooperate. And then I came here to warn you." He stood slowly, moved around the desk. "Why?" "Because I don't trust them. Because they lied about what you are. Because..." I took a breath. "Because I'd rather make my own choice about who to trust than have it made for me." "That's incredibly stupid of you." "Probably." He laughed then, a rare laugh that sounded almost surprised. "You realize what you've just done? You've committed yourself to this. To me. If the NIS finds out you warned me, you're going to prison." "I know. And you're doing it anyway." "I am." He studied me for a long moment, and I couldn't read his expression at all. Then he said something I didn't expect. "Thank you. What happens now?" "Now we prepare. The NIS has been getting too close lately, which means someone inside my organization is talking. Your warning confirms it." He pulled out his phone, sent a rapid series of messages. "I'll need you to continue meeting with them, feeding them information that seems useful but actually isn't. Can you do that?" "I can try." "Good. Because Soline, I meant what I said before. Most people in my world don't retire peacefully. But if you help me now, if we get through this, I'll make sure you're protected. Whatever you want, money, safety, a way out, it's yours." "I don't want money." "Then what do you want?" I looked at him, this dangerous, complicated man who'd dragged me out of my safe, boring life and into something I still didn't fully understand. And I realized I wanted something I couldn't quite name, purpose, maybe, or meaning, or just the feeling that my life mattered beyond translating documents in a closet office. "I want the truth," I said. "About everything. About who you really are, what you really do, and why the NIS is so determined to bring you down. He nodded slowly. All right. But Solene? Once you know the truth, there's no going back. You understand that? I understand. Then sit down, he said. Because this is going to take a while. What he told me over the next 3 hours changed everything. The truth was darker and more complex than anything I'd imagined. Kael's father had built the Baekdu organization from nothing, starting as a street enforcer and rising through violence and strategic brilliance until he controlled a significant portion of Seoul's underground economy. When he died, killed by a rival organization when Kael was 19, Kael had inherited not just a criminal empire but a war. He'd spent the next decade consolidating power, eliminating rivals, and transforming the organization from a violent gang into something more sophisticated. But the violence never fully stopped, and the scar on his face was from an assassination attempt 3 years ago that had killed his younger brother. The NIS isn't interested in me because of laws, he said. They're interested because I have information about government corruption that goes all the way to the top. Contracts I've seen. Money I've moved. Names of politicians and police chiefs and even NIS agents who've been on my payroll at various times. If they bring me down, they control the narrative. They can bury the evidence that incriminates them. So this isn't about justice. Justice is a luxury for people who can afford it. This is about power. About who controls the story. And me? Why did you really pull me into this? He was quiet for a moment. Initially? Because you were useful and available and I needed someone I could control. But somewhere along the way, that changed. You see things clearly, Solene. You're not impressed by power or money or fear. You just want to understand. That's rare in my world. Is that what I am to you? Someone rare? You're someone I trust, he said quietly. Which is more than I can say for most people in my life. The admission felt significant, like he'd handed me something fragile and dangerous. And maybe he had. Because trust in his world was currency, and he'd just made me wealthy beyond measure or incredibly vulnerable, depending on how you looked at it. Playing double agent for the NIS while actually working against them turned out to be the most terrifying experience of my life, and I'd once woken up in a crime boss's bed, so that's saying something. I met with agents Yoon and Beck weekly, feeding them information that Kael carefully curated. Documents that looked important but actually revealed nothing. Shipping schedules for legitimate goods. Communications with partners who were either clean or already known to law enforcement. I had to make it convincing enough that they wouldn't suspect I was playing them, but vague enough that it couldn't be used to actually prosecute anyone. You're doing well, Miss Kong, Agent Yoon told me after my third meeting. Jin trusts you. Keep building that relationship. We need access to his inner circle. His inner circle doesn't trust easily, I said, which was true. Kael's actual trusted people numbered maybe 5, and they'd all been with him for years. I'm just a translator. Then become more than that. Whatever it takes. Whatever it takes. The words echoed in my head as I left the cafe where we'd met. They wanted me to get closer to Kael, to become indispensable, maybe even to seduce him if necessary. The implication was clear even if they didn't say it outright. But something had shifted between Kael and me anyway, independent of the NIS's instructions. We were spending more time together, not always for work. He'd taken me to a gallery opening where I felt completely out of place among Seoul's art elite, but he'd stayed by my side, explaining pieces with surprising knowledge. We'd had dinner at a pujangmaka, a street food tent, where he ate tteokbokki like a normal person and told me stories about growing up in Seoul before his father died. I wanted to be a lawyer, he admitted. Stupid, right? The son of a crime boss wanting to study law. Not stupid. Maybe you wanted to understand the systems you'd have to work against. Maybe. He smiled, but it was sad. Or maybe I just wanted to be normal. To have a life where people didn't cross the street when they saw me coming. Do you regret it? The life you have? Every day, he said quietly. And not at all. It's both things at once. I understood that. My life before Kael had been safe and boring and slowly crushing me. My life now was dangerous and complicated and somehow more alive than anything I'd experienced before. Both things could be true. But the real problem started when Agent Beck showed me photos during one of our meetings. Not of Kael, of me and Kael together. At the gallery. At the restaurant. Walking through Hanam-dong late at night, too close to be just professional. You're getting close to him, Agent Beck said. Good. That's exactly what we need. It's not what you think. I don't care what it is. I care that you're in a position to get us what we need. Jin has a safe in his penthouse. Old-fashioned, physical documents he doesn't trust to computers. We need you to get access to that safe. How? He's not going to just give me the combination. Then find another way. You're smart, Miss Kong. I'm sure you'll figure it out. They left me with that impossible task, and I knew I had to tell Kael. But when I got to his penthouse that evening, he already knew something was wrong. Maybe it was my expression, maybe he was just that good at reading people. What happened? He asked immediately. I told him everything. About the photos, about the safe, about the pressure to get him to trust me enough to access his most protected secrets. I expected anger, accusations, maybe even threats. Instead, he just looked tired. They're escalating, he said. Which means they're getting desperate. Which means we're running out of time. Time for what? I'm planning to leave Seoul, he said quietly. Not permanently, but for a while. Let things cool down, reorganize, come back when the attention has shifted elsewhere. But I need to secure certain assets first, make sure the organization can function without me. And the safe they want me to access? Contains evidence that would destroy half of Seoul's political establishment. Names, dates, amounts. Proof of every dirty deal and corrupt payment and illegal arrangement that keeps the city running. The NIS wants it because they want to control who goes down and who stays up. But you won't give it to them. I can't. The moment that information becomes public, people die. Not just corrupt politicians, their families, their associates, anyone who might be seen as a loose end. The system we have now is corrupt, but it's stable. Destroying it would create chaos, and chaos is where the real monsters come out to play. I understood then why he'd survived so long in his world. He wasn't just powerful or ruthless, he understood systems, understood consequences, understood that sometimes the lesser evil was the best choice available. So what do we do? I asked. You tell them you're working on it. Stall for time. And I'll handle the rest. Kael. I hesitated, not sure how to say what I was feeling. When you leave Seoul, what happens to me? He crossed the room, stood close enough that I could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. You could come with me. If you wanted. My heart did something complicated in my chest. Why would you want that? Because somewhere along the way, you stopped being a tool and became something else. Someone I look forward to seeing. Someone who makes me think maybe I could have a different life, eventually. I'm not who you think I am. I'm just a translator who made some bad decisions. You're someone brave enough to get into a stranger's car when you're desperate. Someone smart enough to play both sides without getting caught. Someone honest enough to warn me when you could have just saved yourself. He reached out, brushed a strand of hair from my face. That's not nothing, Solene. The moment hung between us, heavy with possibilities and dangers and everything we weren't saying. Then his phone buzzed, and the spell broke. He checked it, and his expression hardened. We have a problem. Someone just tried to access my office. Security caught them, but this means whoever's feeding information to the NIS is making their move. Everything accelerated after that. Kael's organization went into lockdown mode, everyone suspicious of everyone else, trying to find the leak before more damage could be done. I kept meeting with the NIS, kept stalling, kept pretending I was making progress while actually learning nothing useful. Then Agent Yoon showed me a new photo. Kael meeting with someone I didn't recognize, someone whose face was marked in the intelligence files as connected to North Korean smuggling operations. This is what you're protecting, Agent Yoon said. He's not some Robin Hood figure, Miss Kong. He's facilitating actual threats to national security. Are you really willing to go down for that? I looked at the photo, trying to reconcile it with everything I knew about Kael. Yes, he operated outside the law. Yes, he did things that were illegal. But this? Working with North Korean smugglers? That was a line I couldn't imagine him crossing. Unless he had a reason I didn't understand. Unless there was more to the story. I need more time, I told them. You don't have more time. We're moving on Jin in 72 hours. Either you give us access to that safe, or we go in without the evidence and hope it's enough to hold him. 72 hours. 3 days to figure out whether Kael was who I thought he was or if I'd been blind to the truth all along. 3 days to decide whether to save him or save myself. I went to his penthouse that night, let myself in with the key he'd given me weeks ago. He was standing by those floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at Seoul's lights, and he looked like someone saying goodbye to something he loved. They're coming for you, I said. 3 days. I know. I have people everywhere, remember? Including in the NIS. Then you need to leave now. Tonight. I can't. Not yet. There are things I need to finalize first. Kael, please. Whatever you're planning, it's not worth dying for. He turned to face me. What do you think is in that safe, Solene? Evidence. Proof of corruption. That's part of it. But there's also something else. Insurance. Names of NIS agents who've worked for me. Proof that their investigation is compromised from the inside. If they take me down, I take them down too. Mutually assured destruction. Exactly. Which means they can't actually arrest me without destroying themselves. So the question is, what are they really planning? I hadn't thought about that. The NIS was acting desperate, which didn't make sense if they knew Kael had leverage over them. Unless they were planning something that didn't involve arrest. Something permanent. They're going to kill you, I breathed. Make it look like gang violence or an accident or... Yes. Which means I need to move first. He pulled out an envelope from his desk. There's a flight to Tokyo tomorrow night. 2 tickets. You don't have to come, but the offer stands. You're really leaving. I'm really leaving. The organization will survive without me, I've made sure of that. But I can't stay in Seoul anymore. Not with the NIS hunting me and whoever's betraying me from inside my own circle. He paused. Come with me, Solene. Whatever you were translating documents for in that closet office, it's not worth dying for either. He was right. Everything I'd built in Seoul, my career, my apartment, my safe boring life, none of it mattered compared to surviving. And more than that, some part of me wanted to see what came next, wanted to follow this dangerous man to whatever came after Seoul. But first, I needed to know the truth. The North Korean smugglers. The photo the NIS showed me. Tell me that's not real. His expression shifted, something like respect flickering across his face. It's real. But not what they think. That man was a defector I helped escape to the south. The NIS can't acknowledge they missed his entry, so they're painting it as me working with the regime when actually I was working against it. Why would you help a defector? Because my brother wanted to. Before he died. He had this stupid idealistic dream of helping people escape, of making a difference. After he was killed, I promised myself I'd finish what he started. He smiled sadly. Even criminals have causes, Solene. And just like that, I understood. Kael wasn't a monster or a hero, he was just a person trying to navigate an impossible situation, making choices that were never clean but trying to aim for something better than pure survival. Just like I was. Okay, I said. I'll come with you. Just like that? Just like that. The next 2 days were chaos. Kael systematically dismantled parts of his organization, moved money, secured people's positions, prepared for an absence that might become permanent. I packed a single bag with everything I couldn't leave behind, my passport, my laptop, photos of my family, the manuscript I'd been secretly writing for 2 years that no one knew about. I didn't tell the NIS. Didn't tell my mother. Didn't tell anyone except Yuna, who I met for coffee one last time. You're leaving, she said immediately. I can see it on your face. How do you always know? Because I know you. Where are you going? I can't tell you that. But Yuna, if anyone asks. I haven't seen you in weeks. We had a fight about you working too much. I have no idea where you went. She grabbed my hand. Be careful, Solene. Whatever you're running from or running to, just be careful. I hugged her, this friend who dragged me to that bar where everything changed, and wondered if I'd ever see her again. The flight was at 10 p.m. Kael picked me up at 9, the black Mercedes one last time, except this time we both knew it wasn't his car anymore. He'd sold everything, liquidated everything, become a ghost before actually disappearing. Any regrets? He asked as we drove to the airport. Too many to count. You? Same. But there was also excitement underneath the fear, a sense of possibility that felt dangerous and thrilling. We were leaving everything behind, but maybe that meant we could become anything. We made it through security. Made it to the gate. We're about to board when I saw them, Agents Yoon and Beck, flanked by airport security, moving toward us with the kind of purpose that meant everything was about to go very wrong. Kael Jin, Agent Yoon called out. You're under arrest for. But he didn't finish. Because Kael didn't run or fight or do any of the things they expected. Instead, he pulled out his phone, pressed a button, and suddenly every screen in the airport terminal switched to the same video. It was Agent Beck. in what looked like a hotel room, with a known member of a rival criminal organization, discussing plans to assassinate Kael and frame it as gang violence, discussing how they'd split his assets and control his territory, discussing how the NIS would cover it up because they'd be the heroes who eliminated a dangerous criminal. The video played on every screen, and people stopped, stared, recorded it on their phones. Within seconds, it was spreading across social media, news outlets picking it up, the NIS's entire operation exposed in real time. Agent Beck's face went white. Agent Yoon just looked defeated. Insurance, Kael said quietly, just for them. I told you I had it. Did you really think I'd let you kill me without consequences? You just destroyed your own leverage, Agent Yoon said. Everything you had on us is now public. We have nothing to lose by arresting you now. Except that arresting me proves the video is real. Proves you were planning to murder a civilian. Proves the NIS is exactly as corrupt as I said. Kael smiled. But please, try it. See what happens. They stared at each other, a standoff in the middle of Incheon Airport with hundreds of witnesses recording everything. And then Agent Yoon made a choice. He lowered his hand, gestured for security to stand down. This isn't over, he said. Yes, Kael replied. It is. We boarded the flight. Found our seats. Sat in silence as the plane taxied and lifted and Seoul disappeared beneath us, the city lights spreading out like a glittering web that we'd just escaped. That was insane, I finally said. That was survival. What happens now? They'll come after you eventually. Maybe. But by then, I'll have built something new somewhere else. And they'll have their own problems to deal with. That video is going to trigger investigations, resignations, possibly prosecutions. The NIS will be too busy cleaning house to worry about me. And us? He looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw something in his expression that made my heart race. I meant what I said before. You stopped being a tool and became something else. Someone important. Someone I want to keep knowing. Even though I'm just a translator who made bad decisions? Especially because of that. He reached over, took my hand. We're all just people making bad decisions and hoping they turn out okay, Solene. You're just braver about it than most. The flight to Tokyo was 4 hours. We didn't sleep. Instead, we talked about everything, what we'd do in Japan, where we'd go after, what kind of life we wanted to build now that we'd burned down the old ones. It felt like planning a future, and that was terrifying and wonderful in equal measure. Tokyo welcomed us with rain and neon and millions of people who didn't know our names or our stories. We checked into a hotel in Shibuya, and for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. What now? I asked, standing by the window looking out at the city. Kael came up behind me, close enough that I could feel the warmth of him. Now we figure out who we are when we're not running. Now we see if this thing between us is real or just adrenaline. Now we start over. And if it doesn't work? Then at least we tried. At least we were brave enough to find out. I turned to face him, and maybe it was the adrenaline or the relief or just the accumulated tension of everything we'd been through, but I kissed him. And he kissed me back, and it felt like something clicking into place, like a question I didn't know I'd been asking finally getting answered. We spent that first night in Tokyo learning each other in ways that had nothing to do with crime or translation or survival. Just two people who'd found each other in the worst possible way and somehow made it work anyway. Over the following weeks, we built a life. Kael had money stashed in accounts all over Asia, enough to live comfortably while figuring out what came next. I started writing seriously, turning all the chaos of the last few months into something that might become a book. He consulted for legitimate businesses, using all that knowledge about systems and strategy in legal ways. It wasn't perfect. We argued about his past, about whether he could really leave it behind. I had nightmares about the NIS finding us. He had moments where I could see him missing the power and control he'd given up. But it was real. Messy and complicated and real. 6 months after we left Seoul, my mother called. I'd sent her letters, carefully vague about where I was and what I was doing, just enough to let her know I was alive. She was angry, confused, but mostly she just wanted to know I was safe. "Are you happy?" she finally asked. I looked at Kael, who was making breakfast in our tiny Tokyo apartment, humming off-key to music from his phone. "Yeah, Mom. I think I am." "Then that's enough." It wasn't forgiveness, but it was acceptance, and that was something. A year after we left, the NIS investigation finally concluded. Agent Beck was arrested for corruption and conspiracy to commit murder. Agent Yoon resigned. The organization that had been hunting Kael was dissolved and rebuilt from scratch. And we stayed free, stayed hidden, stayed together. "Do you miss Seoul?" I asked Kael one evening. "Sometimes. But I don't miss what I was there. Don't miss the violence or the constant calculation or the weight of all those expectations." "What do you miss then?" "The food, mostly." He grinned. "And maybe the feeling that I was building something that mattered." "You're building something now. Just different." "Better," he agreed. "Definitely better." 2 years after everything started, we went back to Seoul. Not to stay, just to visit, to see what had changed. The city looked the same but felt different, like we were tourists in our own past. We visited the restaurant in Itaewon where I'd gotten drunk that night, and Kael ordered us soju, and we laughed about how absurd it all was. "If you could go back," I asked, "and warn yourself about what was going to happen, would you?" "Not a chance." "You?" "No. I think I'd still get in that car. Still make all the same stupid decisions." "Not stupid. Brave." "Same thing, sometimes." We raised our glasses to that, to bravery and stupidity and the fine line between them. To getting into cars we shouldn't get into and trusting people we shouldn't trust. To burning down our lives and building something better from the ashes. Before we left Seoul, I did one last thing. I went to my old apartment building, the cramped place in Mapogu where I'd lived before everything changed. A young woman lived there now, and she looked at me with the same exhausted expression I used to have, the same sense of being trapped in a life that was slowly crushing her. "I used to live here," I told her. "In this exact apartment." "Oh. Do you want to look around, or?" "No. I just wanted to tell you something. If you ever get a chance to do something crazy, something that terrifies you but also excites you, take it. Don't let safety become a prison. Don't let stability kill all your dreams." She looked at me like I was insane, and maybe I was. But I meant it. Kael and I left Seoul that evening, flew back to Tokyo, back to our messy, complicated, beautiful life. And I thought about how one drunk mistake had led to everything, the danger, the fear, the running, but also the love, the freedom, the feeling that my life finally meant something. Would I recommend getting into a dangerous man's car? Absolutely not. Would I do it again? Every single time. Because here's what I learned: sometimes the worst decisions lead to the best outcomes. Sometimes trusting the wrong person is actually trusting the right person. Sometimes you have to burn down everything you've built to discover what you actually want. And sometimes, just sometimes, the man who terrifies you is also the man who saves you, from danger, yes, but also from yourself, from the safe, boring prison of the life you thought you were supposed to want. So that's my story. From translator to criminal consultant to fugitive to something I still can't quite name. From Seoul to Tokyo to whatever comes next. From safety to chaos to a kind of peace I never expected to find. And you know what? I wouldn't change a thing. If this story made you feel something, fear, excitement, hope, whatever, do me a favor. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what happens next, because this is just the beginning. Share it with someone who needs to hear that it's okay to make crazy choices sometimes, that it's okay to burn down your safe life if it's killing you slowly. And comment below to let me know, have you ever made a decision that terrified you but changed everything? Because I bet you have. We all have those moments. The question is whether we're brave enough to take them. Thanks for listening. Thanks for being here. Thanks for letting me tell you about the night I got into a dangerous man's car and woke up in his bed and ended up finding everything I didn't know I was looking for. Until next time, stay brave. Stay reckless. And never stop getting into cars that terrify you. Soline.